Welcome to MrNightVault, a place where the night never sleeps, and every echo carries a story you were never meant to hear. Tonight's episode, 10 True Night Shift Hospital Horror Stories. The Nurse Alone. These are the kinds of stories whispered between nurses on the night shift, stories about footsteps in empty corridors, elevator doors that open on their own, and voices coming from rooms marked unoccupied. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? Let's see who's still awake when the rest of the world sleeps. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. We're aiming for 1,000 souls to join our vault this month. Once you step inside, the dark tends to follow you home. I used to work as a night nurse at St. Gabriel's Hospital, right in downtown Los Angeles. It wasn't the kind of place you see in medical dramas. No shiny floors, no smiling doctors cracking jokes in the hallways. St. Gabriel's was old, built in the 1950s, half renovated a dozen times and held together by what felt like duct tape and prayers. The West Wing especially, it had this heaviness about it, like the air was thicker there. My second week on the night shift, I learned about room 413. There's always that one place in every hospital the staff avoids, some out-of-the-way room with a story behind it. At St. Gabriel's, it was 413. The door was sealed shut, metal brackets bolted across the frame. A faded sign read "Out of service." Someone had scribbled "Do not enter" underneath in Sharpie. When I first asked about it, my supervisor, Maria, just said, "No one's assigned there anymore." "Don't worry about it." She said it too quickly, like she'd repeated that line before. The setup, it was my second night shift alone, a quiet Tuesday, only 4 patients in my wing. Around 2:30 a.m., I was doing my rounds when the overhead lights flickered. Not unusual for that part of the building, but it made me pause outside 413, even sealed. I could feel a draft seeping out from the crack beneath the door. Cold air like from a freezer. I crouched a little, trying to see under it, but it was just black. Then I heard it, a whisper. My name, Mia. I froze. It wasn't loud, but it was close, like someone pressed their lips right up to the crack and breathed it out. At first, I thought maybe it was one of the janitors messing around. There was a guy, Raymond, who liked to joke with the new hires. But when I turned, the hallway was empty. The only sound was the hum of the vending machine down the corridor. I brushed it off. Sleep deprivation, maybe. It happens on nights like that. The build-up over the next few shifts. I tried to avoid walking past 413, but that wing is shaped like a loop, and sooner or later I'd end up there again. One night, I noticed something weird. The small window above the door, the kind used to peek into patient rooms, was covered from the inside, not with paper or curtains. It looked like gauze, thick, medical gauze layered so heavily that no light could pass through. When I asked Maria if maintenance was working on it, she sighed. "Don't go near that room," she said. "It's complicated." "What's in there?" I asked. She looked at me, really looked, then said, "Nothing that's supposed to be there." And that was the end of that. A few nights later, I was doing vitals when one of the elderly patients, Mr. Navarro, called me over. He was in his late 70s, recovering from a minor stroke. Sweet old man, always polite, he looked shaken. "Miss," he whispered, "someone was crying last night." From the room across mine, I glanced at the chart. His room faced 3. I heard it clear as day, he continued. "A woman." She kept saying, "Please don't leave me," over and over. I checked the hallway cameras later out of curiosity. Between 1 and 2 a.m., the feed outside 413 glitched. Static, snow, and then black for 10 whole minutes. All other cameras worked fine. The history curiosity finally got the better of me. I asked around, most nurses brushed it off, but one, Sam, an older guy who'd been there since the 90s, told me something that made my stomach turn. Back when that wing was still active, he said, 413 belonged to a long-term psych patient. A woman named Elise came in after a car crash in 1987, lost her husband and kid in it, never spoke for years. Then one night she started screaming, said she saw her husband in the corner calling her name. Nurses ran in, found her convulsing on the floor. By the time they got the doctor, she was gone. Heart failure. He paused, then added, "After that, patients started complaining about a woman crying in the next room. They tried moving beds around, but it kept happening. Maintenance sealed the room in 2003. I laughed nervously. But he didn't. "Don't work that hallway alone," he said. The climax that warning came back to me about a week later. It was a stormy Thursday night. Power flickered on and off all shift. Around 3 a.m., the emergency generator kicked in, dimming the lights to a dull orange glow. I was heading toward the supply room when I noticed something strange. The seal on 413's door was broken. One of the metal brackets hung loose, screws scattered across the floor. The door was open, just a sliver. A cold draft hit me like a wall. My heart was pounding. I told myself to just call security, but curiosity won again. I pushed the door open. The smell hit first. Stale disinfectant, mold, and something metallic underneath. The room was pitch dark except for faint moonlight filtering through the cracked blinds. A bed stood in the corner, still made, like someone had just stepped away. The gauze from the window was on the floor, shredded. Then I heard it again. "Mia." This time it came from the far corner. I lifted my flashlight. There was someone standing there. A woman, pale hospital gown hanging loose off her frame. Her hair was long, wet-looking, her face turned toward the wall. My throat went dry. "Ma'am, you're not supposed to be here," I managed to whisper. She turned, her eyes. They weren't right. It was like she had none at all. Just deep, hollow sockets that caught the light for a second and shimmered. Her mouth opened as if to speak, but no sound came out. Only a gurgling, choking noise. I ran. I don't even remember moving. Just the slam of my shoes against the tile and the echo chasing me down the hall. When I got back to the nurse's station, Maria and Sam were already there, pale and silent. They'd heard the door slam shut behind me. The Resolution security checked the room right after. They said it was empty, still sealed even, like nothing had ever been disturbed. But I know what I saw. A few nights later, they transferred me to another wing. "For your peace of mind," they said. But every now and then, during the late hours, I still hear it over the intercom. Faint, barely audible, but there. A woman's voice. "Mia. And every time I walk past that section of the hospital, the door to 413 looks newer, like it's been replaced. The color of the metal is slightly different now. Last week, I noticed a small tag hanging from the handle. It had my name on it. Room 413. Assigned nurse. M. Rivera. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can still feel that cold air from beneath the door. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if she's still waiting for me to come back inside. I've worked the night shift at St. Clair's Hospital in New Orleans for almost 6 years now. It's an old place and built back in the 1930s, and it feels every bit of its age. You can smell the mildew in the walls, hear the pipes groan when the humidity gets bad, and sometimes when the halls go quiet, you could swear the building breathes. Night shifts are usually slow. Most of the patients are sedated. The phones stop ringing, and it's just me, 2 other nurses, Carrie and Leland, and 1 security guard who spends most of his time watching sports on his phone. But every now and then something happens that reminds you just how strange hospitals can be after dark. The story I'm about to tell you happened around 8 months ago. I haven't talked about it since, not to my coworkers, not to my family, because even saying it out loud feels like giving it life again, and I don't want whatever that was to find its way back. The setup that night. I was on rounds between the 2nd and 3rd floors, mostly elderly patients. Post-surgery cases, nothing out of the ordinary. It was 2:30 a.m., the quietest part of the shift. Carrie was in the break room reheating coffee, and Leland was charting vitals down the hall. Then came the sound. Ding, an elevator. Now, that shouldn't have been strange, except it was that elevator, the one no one used after midnight. It was the service lift, tucked away behind the storage hallway. It went down to the basement, the part of the hospital where the old morgue was. Officially, the morgue had been moved to the new wing years ago, but the lower level still had the cold room, old gurneys and backup freezers for overflow cases. Maintenance went down there sometimes during the day, but at night, never. At first I thought maybe security was doing a check, but then over the intercom I heard the faint echo of the basement, motion sensor beeping, the one that only triggers if someone passes by the morgue doors. No one was scheduled to be there. The build-up curiosity can be dangerous in hospitals. You get used to weird noises, machines beeping, patients calling out in their sleep. old wiring clicking on and off. But something about that ding and that distant beep made my stomach twist. I decided to check it out. I took the long hallway toward the service area. The lights buzzed overhead, one of them flickering so hard it barely stayed lit. When I turned the corner, I saw it. The elevator doors were open, no one inside. The fluorescent light in the elevator flickered, casting long, moving shadows across the floor. The digital display above the doors read, B basement. But I was standing right there on the second floor. The elevator should have shown it too. I leaned closer. The B glowed faintly, almost pulsing. Then the air around me got cold, like walking into a freezer. I pressed the button to close the doors. They didn't move. Instead, the elevator gave a low hum and the B light blinked twice. And then the doors slowly slid shut on their own. When I turned to leave, I heard it again. Ding. I turned back. The doors opened again, just an inch. Like someone was holding the door open button from inside. I don't scare easily, but I felt this deep, primal sense that I was being invited. Something wanted me to step inside. The descent, I don't even know why I did it. Maybe I just wanted to prove it was nothing. A wiring issue, a power glitch, something logical. I stepped in. The elevator smelled like disinfectant and rust. The small mirror in the corner was fogged over, and for a second, I thought I saw something move in the reflection, but it was just my own shaky hand brushing a hair out of my face. I pressed B. The elevator didn't move right away. Then came a jolt and the floor started to descend. There was no music, no hum of the motor, just the faint click of old machinery and the creak of the cables straining against the weight. Halfway down, the lights flickered off completely. Total darkness. The elevator stopped between floors. I hit the emergency button. Nothing. No sound, no static, not even a buzz. Then came the faint scraping sound from above. At first I thought maybe it was the cables shifting, but then it moved closer and I realized it was coming from the small vent in the elevator. Ceiling scrape, pause. Scrape, like someone or something was dragging their fingernails across the metal from the outside. I froze, staring up. The air felt thick, heavy. I could smell something faintly sweet, like old flowers and rot. Then through the vent, I heard a whisper. It was soft, like breath brushing against my ear. Wrong floor. The voice was hoarse, almost wet, like someone speaking through a damaged throat. The lights flickered back on. The display above me flashed B again. The elevator jerked once more and continued down, slowly, painfully. The morgue. When the doors finally opened, I was staring into the dim corridor of the basement. The motion sensor light by the morgue door flickered weakly, buzzing like a dying fly. The air down there was freezing. I could see my breath. Everything smelled faintly metallic. And underneath it, something earthy, decay. I told myself to take one quick look, make sure no one was down there, and get the hell back upstairs. As I stepped out, my shoes squeaked on the tile. The sound echoed down the hall, bouncing back at me louder than it should have. Every few feet, there were doors, old storage rooms, equipment closets, one labeled cold storage. That's when I noticed something strange. The morgue door was open. Just a few inches. A faint yellow light glowed inside. My heart was pounding. I should have called security right then, but something about the light drew me forward. I pushed the door open. The room was colder than the rest of the basement, the kind of cold that burns your skin. There were 3 metal tables, all empty, and a single gurney pushed against the far wall. A sheet covered something beneath it, something the size of a person. I stood frozen in the doorway. Then I heard the elevator behind me ding again. I turned around. The doors were closing. I ran back, shouting, but they sealed shut before I reached them. The button panel beside the door was dark. No response, and then from inside the morgue I heard the sound of wheels turning. Slow, squeaking wheels. I turned back. The gurney had moved. It was in the center of the room now, the sheet still over it, but shifting, as if something underneath had breathed. The climax. That's when the lights cut out. Total blackness. I reached for my phone, turned on the flashlight, and pointed it toward the table. The sheet was gone. The table was empty, but the floor wasn't. There were wet footprints, bare feet, leading away from the gurney, circling around me. Then the flashlight flickered. For half a second, I saw something standing just behind the door frame. It looked like a person, but the proportions were wrong. Too tall, neck tilted at an unnatural angle, its head cocked as if studying me. The light went out, and in the silence I heard that same whisper again. Right behind my ear, "You shouldn't be here." I ran. I slammed the elevator button over and over, screaming, crying, begging. Finally, it opened. I jumped inside and hit the 2 button repeatedly. The doors closed, and the elevator began to rise. Halfway up, it stopped again. The lights dimmed to a faint, sickly yellow. I didn't want to look, but something in me did. Slowly, I turned toward the mirror. There was a handprint on the glass, wet, fresh, but it wasn't mine. The fingers were too long, the shape warped like melted skin, and then, faintly, just before the elevator reached the 2nd floor, I saw a reflection that wasn't my own. A face, pale and bloated, eyes like black holes, watching me from behind my shoulder. When the doors opened, it was gone. The resolution, I stumbled out, barely able to breathe. Leland found me sitting in the hallway, shaking. I told him the elevator got stuck. I didn't mention the rest. Security checked the basement the next morning. The morgue door was locked, lights off. No sign of anyone there, but the motion sensor? It went off again at 2:37 a.m., exactly 24 hours later. And the elevator? Maintenance swears it's disconnected from the morgue floor entirely. The wiring was cut years ago. Still, sometimes when I'm doing rounds late at night, I hear it ding, and I'll glance down the hall, then just in time to see the elevator doors slide open, all by themselves, empty, waiting for someone else to take the ride down. I used to work night shifts at St. James Medical Center in downtown Chicago, a mid-sized hospital built in the 1940s, tucked between an old church and a half-collapsed parking structure that should have been condemned years ago. If you've ever worked nights in a hospital, you know the kind of quiet I'm talking about. That heavy, dead silence that sits on top of everything. It's not peaceful. It's oppressive. It makes every sound, a rolling gurney, a distant cough, a monitor beep, feel 10 times louder than it should. I started at St. James in 2018, right out of nursing school. I was young, tired, and trying to prove myself. The older nurses were kind, but they had a way of talking around certain topics, things that happened after midnight, places you don't volunteer for. I thought it was just hospital superstition. Every hospital has its ghost stories, but I learned pretty quickly that at St. James, they weren't joking. The first time I heard about room 207, it was from a janitor named Ellis. He was one of those guys who looked like he'd been part of the building itself. Gray beard, raspy smoker's voice, always pushing that same squeaky mop bucket. One night around 2:45 a.m., I was restocking the supply closet on the 2nd floor when he rolled by and said, "You might want to finish up before 3. I laughed, asked him why. He stopped, gave me this look like he was checking whether I was new or just stupid. "Because," he said, "at 3:12 a.m. room 207 calls a code blue every damn night. A code blue means someone's heart has stopped. It's the kind of alarm that gets your blood running cold no matter how many times you hear it. But 207 wasn't even on the patient rotation list. When I checked the schedule, the room was listed as sealed, maintenance restricted. Ellis leaned on his mop and said, "They boarded it up in 79. Patient flatlined in there, but the monitor didn't stop. They pulled the plug, shut the breakers, hell, even replaced the wiring. Still went off at the same time every night. Finally just sealed it and stopped assigning the room. But the monitor still trips. I thought he was just messing with me. Hospitals love to haze rookies with haunted floor stories. But that night, right around 3:10, the quiet in the hallway changed. You could feel it. That shift in the air like pressure dropping before a storm. Then through the intercom, code blue, room 207, code blue, room 207. The sound hit me like a punch. The older nurses didn't even react. They just looked up, sighed, and went back to their work. I froze, standing in the hallway, listening to the alarm echo through empty corridors. The charge nurse, Gloria, noticed my face and said, "Ignore it, sweetheart. That room's been empty longer than you've been alive." She went back to charting. Nobody even acknowledged the overhead anymore. The sound stopped after 30 seconds. Just like that, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The next night, I made an excuse to walk that hallway around 3:10. The door to 207 was still there. metal, sealed with a padlock and painted over at least twice. A "Do Not Enter Maintenance" sign hung crooked. I stood outside and waited. At exactly 3:12, the overhead blared again. "Code blue, room 207. This time I heard something else. Faint, muffled behind the door. It sounded like a heart monitor beeping, slow, then fast, then flatline. I swear on my life I heard a voice too. Just one word. "Help!" I jumped back, nearly dropping my clipboard. When I looked down the hall, Ellis was there, watching me from the supply closet. He didn't say anything, just shook his head slowly, like I'd just made a big mistake. Over the next few weeks, I couldn't stay away. Every night shift, I found myself walking past 207, telling myself it was just curiosity, but it started to feel more like obsession. I started noticing small things, and the air around the door was colder. Sometimes I'd see condensation on the lock even when the hallway was warm. Then came the night I made the worst decision of my life. It was a Friday in early March. Snow outside, power flickering from the storm. We were short-staffed, just me, Gloria, and a couple interns. Around midnight, I found Ellis in the break room, smoking out the window like always. I told him I wanted to see what was inside 207. He froze mid-drag, turned to me with that haunted look. "Don't," he said. "They left it locked for a reason. But curiosity and exhaustion are a dangerous mix." I waited until everyone was busy. A patient had a seizure down in ICU. Alarms were going off everywhere. I slipped into the maintenance office and grabbed the old master key ring. When I got back to 207, the hallway lights were dimmed for night mode. My heart was pounding. I remember my hand shaking as I fit the key in the padlock. Click. The door groaned as I pulled it open. The smell hit first: mildew, stale air, and something faintly metallic. The room was covered in dust, the kind that looks undisturbed for decades. Broken bed frame, cracked linoleum, cobwebs thick enough to hang from. But there, against the far wall, stood a single hospital monitor. Plugged in, powered on, its screen was black. I stepped closer. The hum in the air was strange, like the sound you hear when standing too close to a live wire. I could feel the vibration through the floor. Then the screen flickered, a single green line appeared steady. Then it spiked. Beep, beep, beep. The sound made my stomach drop. There was no patient. The monitor wasn't connected to anything, but the rhythm was perfect, like a heart still beating. I reached out, trembling, and the instant my finger brushed the machine, it stopped. Flatline, a voice, faint, distorted, whispered through the speaker. "Code blue." The lights in the hallway went out. The intercom blared again. "Code blue, room 207. Over and over, faster each time, echoing through the dark. I stumbled backward into the hallway, tripping over the door frame. When I looked back, the monitor's green light filled the room. And in the glow, I saw the faint outline of someone lying on the bed. Not a body, more like a shadow. But it moved, its head turned toward me, and then everything stopped. Lights back on. Alarm silent. The room was empty again. They found me sitting on the floor when the others came looking. I got written up for unauthorized access and nearly fired. Gloria didn't even yell. She just looked at me like she'd seen it before. Later, Ellis found me outside on a smoke break, still shaking. He sat beside me quietly. "You saw it, didn't you?" he said. I nodded. He sighed, rubbed his temples. "They say his name was Martin Graves. Heart attack patient, 1979. Died during surgery prep. The doctor stepped out to get a crash cart, but by the time he got back, the monitor flatlined. They revived him for 30 seconds. He kept saying he wasn't supposed to be there. Then nothing. Every night since 3/12, the time he coded. Never missed a night." I asked him if anyone ever tried to remove the monitor. He laughed, and that kind of laugh that isn't really funny. They did, twice. Both times, power cut across the floor. When they brought it back up, it was sitting right where it used to be, plugged in. I quit St. James 2 months later. I still live in Chicago, and sometimes when I drive past the building at night, I can see that faint flicker of green light from the second-floor window. The hospital shut down last year. Budget cuts, structural decay. It's scheduled for demolition soon. But last week, one of my old coworkers texted me, said the demolition crew started early, said their equipment kept malfunctioning around the east wing. Power surges, false alarms. At 3:12 a.m., their radios all blared the same alert, code blue, room 207, and this time it didn't stop. I've worked as a nurse for over 12 years, but nothing in my career, no ER shift, no psych ward rotation, ever came close to what happened at St. Augustine's Hospital in Salem, Massachusetts. It's not there anymore. The building was shut down in 2014, condemned after decades of infrastructure problems, but people around Salem still talk about it. The hospital had an old Gothic East Wing that everyone called the Whisper Ward. I was a night nurse there for just 1 week, one long, sleepless, soul-eating week. I got the job after transferring from a hospital in Lynn. My mother had recently passed away, and I wanted a change of pace, something quiet, less chaotic. St. Augustine's seemed perfect, an old facility, mostly for long-term patients, hospice care, and rehab. When I told my friend Casey, who'd worked there before me, she said something I still think about. Just don't get assigned to East Wing, that place isn't right. She laughed after she said it, but I could tell she wasn't entirely joking. The East Wing, or Ward E, was closed to most staff. Only a few terminal patients were kept there, usually those with severe dementia, or people whose families couldn't visit often. The ward had narrow halls, faded wallpaper, and those buzzing fluorescent lights that never seemed fully bright. It smelled faintly of disinfectant, old metal, and something else, like damp wood or mildew that came from inside the walls. During orientation, the head nurse, Marjorie, handed me my rotation schedule. I was supposed to cover nights in Ward C, but on my 3rd day she called me into her office. "We're short-staffed tonight," she said, sighing. "You'll be helping in East Wing. It's quiet over there, mostly observation. Shouldn't be a problem." I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell her what Casey told me, but I needed the hours. That first night in East Wing, I worked with 2 others, an older nurse named Helen and a young med student, Tom, doing clinical hours. Helen was kind, but she moved like she'd been doing this job for too long. Every sound made her flinch. The squeak of a gurney wheel, the soft ping of the call light. Around 11:30, she handed me a clipboard. "Just do your rounds before midnight," she said quietly. "And if you hear anything, ignore it." I laughed a little. "Ignore what?" She didn't answer. The East Wing had 6 occupied rooms, though the hallway stretched much farther, with doors sealed shut by metal bars and faded "do not enter" signs. My patients were mostly asleep, except one, room 313, Mrs. Duval. She was an old woman, blind and skeletal, but her voice was sharp. As soon as I stepped in, she spoke. "You're new," she whispered. "They'll know you're here." I tried to keep my tone calm. "Who will, Mrs. Duval?" She tilted her head slightly as if listening to something distant. "The ones who pray? They pray for the dying. They whisper in the dark so the others don't wake." Her words crawled under my skin. I noted her vitals and left quickly. At around 12:15 a.m., while checking room 310, I heard it for the first time. A whisper. It was faint, like wind leaking through a crack in the window, but too deliberate to be that. A soft murmur, syllables too quiet to understand, echoing through the hallway. Tom looked up from his notes. "You hear that?" I nodded. We both stepped into the hall. The sound seemed to come from somewhere down near the locked rooms, the ones long abandoned. Helen appeared behind us suddenly. "Stay away from that end," she snapped, her eyes wide. "They sealed it off for a reason." Tom frowned. "What reason?" But she wouldn't say another word. The next night, Helen called in sick, leaving just me and Tom on duty. We decided to stick close together. Safety in numbers, I guess. Around midnight, the whispers started again, louder this time, rhythmic, almost like chanting. We followed the sound to the far end of the hall where the overhead lights flickered. The air was freezing and I swear I could see my breath. There was a maintenance door half open. Behind it, stairs leading down. Neither of us knew the hospital had a basement under East Wing. Tom shined his phone light down. "You want to check it out?" I hesitated. Every instinct screamed no, but the sound was coming from below. We went down. The air got colder the lower we went. The concrete walls were damp, lined with peeling white paint. When we reached the bottom, there was a corridor lit only by a single emergency bulb, swaying slightly. The whispering was everywhere now. Not from one direction, but all around us. Layers of voices, some low and raspy, others trembling and soft. It almost sounded like prayer. Latin, maybe? We turned a corner and found a large room filled with old beds, medical carts, and rusted IV stands. A row of candles burned along one wall. Fresh candles. And then we saw the writing. Hundreds of names scratched into the plaster, overlapping each other. Some were familiar. Patients I'd seen on charts upstairs. Others I didn't recognize, but next to one of them someone had carved a date. Tonight. That's when I saw my own name. I froze. Lena White, October 9th, that was the date. That night I don't remember dropping my flashlight, but I heard it clatter to the floor. The whispering rose into a soft wail, like a choir exhaling at once. Tom grabbed my arm. We need to go. We ran. Up the stairs through the dark hallway, past the flickering lights. The whispers followed, closer, louder, until they weren't whispers anymore. They were voices, dozens of them. Stay. Pray with us. Don't leave. We burst through the doors into the main wing. The moment we crossed the threshold, the noise stopped. Completely. When Marjorie came in the next morning, I told her everything. She didn't laugh. She didn't even look surprised. She just rubbed her temples and said, "You shouldn't have gone downstairs." That was my last night in East Wing. A week later, Tom quit too. We kept in touch for a bit, but after a few months, his messages stopped. When I called the number he'd given me, it was disconnected. 3 months after I left, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single photograph, an old one, faded around the edges. It showed a group of nurses standing in front of St. Augustine's, maybe in the 1960s. One of them looked exactly like me. On the back, written in the same handwriting as the names on that basement wall, was a message. "They still pray for you in the dark. I don't sleep well anymore. Sometimes when I'm up late, I swear I hear it again, just faintly, beneath the hum of the night. The same slow, trembling chant, the same whispering voices. And every time I close my eyes, I can still see that wall. My name was carved first. The rest of the space is waiting." It was just another quiet night shift, until every hallway light went out one by one, leading her toward the farthest end of the wing. The end where the burn victims used to stay. I've worked as a night shift nurse at a private rehabilitation center on the outskirts of Austin for almost 7 years now. It's not a hospital exactly, more like a halfway facility for long-term recovery patients. Mostly post-surgery, brain trauma, or burn victims who need months of care before being discharged. We get the kind of patients the big hospitals don't want to deal with long-term. The building itself used to be part of an old medical complex that shut down in the 80s. Our section, Wing C, was supposedly renovated, but the walls still smell faintly of antiseptic and smoke. Some of the tiles near the back hallway are cracked, and when it rains, you can hear faint dripping somewhere inside the walls. There are only 3 nurses on duty during night shifts. Me, Rosa, and our supervisor, Mr. Keller. Rosa mostly sticks to the reception area. Keller rarely leaves his office unless it's for rounds or an emergency. That leaves me to check on the patients. I like the quiet, or at least I used to. The first night it started, I was halfway through my shift. Around 2:30 a.m., I'd finished my chart updates and was heading down the long hallway toward room 312, the farthest one in the old wing. That's where Mr. Dawson stayed, a 60-something man recovering from severe burns after a house fire. He didn't talk much, but he'd always nod when I checked his IV. As I walked down that hallway, I noticed something strange. The fluorescent lights above me were flickering, but not all at once. They were going out one by one behind me. You know how hospitals have that sterile hum? The low buzz from the lights, the air conditioning, the monitors? When those lights shut off, the sound changed, like the building was exhaling, losing power in slow motion. I stopped halfway down, turned around, and saw the darkness creeping toward me as each light blinked out. I wasn't scared yet. Power surges happen. But when I looked forward again, I saw something down at the very end of the hallway, just at the edge of the last working light. It looked like someone standing in front of room 312. They were tall. "Completely still, Mr. Keller," I called out, my voice echoing a little. "Is that you?" No answer. The figure didn't move. Then the last light above me went out, and for half a second I swear I heard breathing. Not mine, Slow, ragged breathing coming from down that hall. Then everything went dark. When the backup generator kicked in, the lights flickered back on. The hallway was empty. I ran straight to room 312. Mr. Dawson was asleep, heart monitor steady. Everything looked normal. I told myself it had to be fatigue. I'd been working 6 nights in a row. Still, I mentioned it to Rosa when I clocked out that morning. She gave me this weird look and said, "You were in the old burn wing, right?" "Yeah," I said. "Why?" She hesitated before replying. "That area used to be shut off completely. Before the renovation, I heard it burned down in the 70s, electrical fire. They said some of the patients didn't make it out. I laughed it off, but it didn't sit right with me. The next few nights were fine. I even started to think maybe I'd imagined it. But on Friday around 3 a.m., something else happened. I was in the break room scrolling on my phone when the intercom crackled. Normally, the system only connects to patient rooms or Keller's office, but this was just static, then a faint whispering. I froze. It sounded like multiple voices, overlapping, murmuring so softly I couldn't make out words. Then very distinctly through the static came a woman's voice saying, "It's too hot. It's too hot." The intercom went dead. I ran to Keller's office, but he wasn't there. I checked the camera monitor, the one that shows each hallway. Most of the screens showed empty halls and sleeping patients. But the feed for the west corridor, the old burn wing, was completely black. Just static. Then right before I looked away, a pale shape flickered across the screen for a split second, like someone walking past the camera leaving a blurry trail of white. By the 5th night, I was officially freaked out. I didn't want to be alone, so I convinced Rosa to walk with me on rounds. Everything was fine until we reached the far end again. There's a storage closet beside room 312. It used to hold old burn equipment before the remodel. The door was slightly open and a light was on inside. I hadn't turned it on. Rosa peeked in first. "No one's here," she said, but I saw it before she closed the door. A handprint, smeared across the metal shelf, dark, greasy, almost black, but with the pattern of melted skin. You could see the warped fingerprint ridges. The outline of fingers fused together. Rosa gasped, slammed the door shut, and said, "We're telling Keller." We rushed back to his office. But when we got there, the door was open and the room was empty. His coffee mug was still steaming. His chair was turned slightly toward the monitor screens, and on every single feed the same thing was showing, the long hallway. But the camera was pointed wrong. It wasn't facing the hall anymore. It was angled up toward the ceiling, toward the lights, and as we watched one by one, each light blinked out. We heard it before we saw it. Footsteps. Slow, uneven, echoing down the hall. Rosa whispered, "It's coming this way." We hid behind the desk, barely breathing. Through the office window, we could see part of the corridor. Something moved past the glass. A shape, tall, burned, with skin like melted wax, and eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light. It moved slowly, dragging one leg. The smell of burned fabric hit me through the air vents, sharp and chemical. Then it stopped, right outside Keller's office. There was a long silence. Then very softly it knocked, 3 times. I don't know how long we stayed frozen like that. When we finally got the courage to move, it was gone. Keller never came back that night. He didn't answer his phone, and by morning, the day staff said they hadn't seen him since Thursday. They launched an internal investigation. The security team reviewed the camera footage, but all they found was static between 2:45 and 3:15 a.m. The exact window we saw the figure. Keller was later found in the parking lot unconscious, claiming he had a seizure and no memory of anything after checking the monitors. I took 2 weeks off after that. Rosa quit. When I finally came back, the administrators had sealed off the far hallway again. They told us it was for electrical maintenance, but I know better, because some nights, when I'm restocking supplies near the stairwell, I can still hear it. Faint, distant knocking echoing through the walls. 3 slow knocks, always from the direction of the long hall. And sometimes, if the lights flicker just right, I swear I can see a tall, burned silhouette standing at the far end, waiting. If you ever visit a hospital in Austin and find yourself walking alone at night, pay attention to the lights above you. If they start going out one by one behind you, don't look back. I've worked as a registered nurse for 12 years now, most of it on night shifts. People always assume hospitals are the safest places in the world, but anyone who's worked in one long enough will tell you the truth. They're not. Hospitals are strange places. You see life come in and death go out almost every night. The walls hold on to things, feelings, sounds, maybe even memories. This happened in 2017 when I worked at a hospital in Seattle. I won't say which one, but it's one of the bigger ones near the downtown area. I was stationed in the pediatric ICU back then, which is both the most heartbreaking and oddly peaceful place in the hospital. The patients there were kids, babies to teenagers, and every night we fought to keep them alive. Some nights we won, some nights we didn't. It was a Tuesday night, early winter, the kind of night where the city outside felt frozen in place, drizzle on the windows, streetlights blurring through fog, and everything silent except for the hum of machines and the occasional beeping from a monitor. Visiting hours had ended an hour ago around 9 p.m. and parents had been gently escorted out. We nurses were making our rounds, checking IVs, adjusting oxygen, charting vitals. There were 4 of us that night. Me, Haley, my charge nurse, a new nurse named Mark who'd just transferred from general care, and Claire, one of the older nurses who'd been there longer than anyone. Around 11:15, I was finishing up charting when I heard something that didn't belong in a hospital. Laughter. A child's laughter. Light, high-pitched, like a 5-year-old's. At first I thought maybe it was one of the kids awake and playing with their tablet or watching a video. But then I remembered most of them were intubated, sedated, or too weak to talk, let alone laugh. The sound came again. Closer this time. Just a soft giggle echoing down the dim hallway between the patient rooms. "Did you hear that?" I asked Mark, who was checking vitals at the next station. He looked up confused. "Hear what?" "Laughing," I said. "Like a little kid?" He frowned and shook his head. "No, maybe from the waiting area?" But the waiting area was on the other side of the security doors, locked after hours. Parents weren't allowed back once visiting hours ended. Strict rule. I brushed it off, went back to my computer, but a few minutes later, I heard it again. A giggle, then the sound of tiny feet running. Soft, bare feet. This time Haley looked up from her station too. "Okay," she said, standing. "That's not just me, right?" "Nope," I said, relieved someone else heard it. We followed the sound down the hallway. The lights in the ICU were dimmed to a soft yellow glow, meant to keep the kids calm while they slept. The giggling echoed faintly, bouncing between the rooms. "Hello?" Haley called out gently. "Is someone out of bed?" No answer. We turned the corner and that's when I saw it. The door to room 7 was open, just a crack. That room belonged to a boy named Thomas, age 6. He'd been in a coma for almost 2 weeks after a severe car accident. His parents had just left around 8. I nudged the door open. Inside, the room looked normal. The machines hummed quietly, the heart monitor beeped steady. But the bed was empty. "Haley," I whispered. "He's not here." She immediately rushed to the monitor. The sensors were still attached and the readings were steady. Heart rate, 74. Oxygen, 97%. But the bed was empty. That didn't make sense. The sensors couldn't work unless they were on the patient. Haley lifted the blanket. The spot where the boy should have been was indented, like someone had just been lying there. "The sheets were warm, Thomas," I said, trying not to sound panicked. "Sweetheart, are you hiding?" We checked under the bed, the bathroom, even the linen closet. Nothing. I went to the hallway and looked both ways. The floor was silent again. The laughter was gone. Then Claire came running from the other end, looking pale. "Room 9's monitor just flatlined," she said. We sprinted down there. Room 9 was a teenage girl named Amelia, post-surgery, stable just an hour ago. When we entered, her heart monitor was a solid, flat tone. She was gone. We did everything, compressions, meds, code team, but nothing worked. She was pronounced dead at 11:32 p.m. While we were cleaning up, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. On the floor near her bed, faintly visible against the linoleum, were small wet footprints, child-sized, leading from the direction of room 7. None of the other nurses said a word. Haley quietly got a mop. We cleaned it up and didn't mention it to anyone. When the coroner came and took Amelia's body, I walked past room 7 again. The door was still open. I peeked inside and nearly screamed. Thomas was back in bed, monitors still beeping steady. He was lying there peacefully as if he'd never moved. His oxygen clip, his IV line, everything was perfectly in place. But his eyelashes were wet like he'd been crying or sweating. And his hand, the one resting outside the blanket, was freezing cold. The next morning, when Thomas's parents came in, they told us something that left us speechless. They said he'd been talking in his sleep that night, for the first time since the accident. Whispering something like, "She said she wants to play." He never woke up again. Thomas passed away 2 days later. After his death, that room stayed empty for a while. Nobody wanted to use it. But eventually a new child was admitted. A little girl named Abby, age 4. The first night she stayed there, she told Haley something during her bedtime check. She said, "The boy came to play last night, but he was sad." Haley asked, "What boy?" Abby pointed at the empty space beside her bed. "The one who says he doesn't want to be alone anymore." A few nights later, she recovered enough to be discharged. That room's been closed for renovations ever since. Every now and then, when I walk past the pediatric ICU, I still think about that sound, that giggle echoing through the hall. Hospitals are supposed to be for healing, but some souls, they never leave, and sometimes the ones who stayed on just want someone to play with. I've been a nurse in Miami for 12 years now, long enough to know that hospitals have their own kind of ghosts. Not necessarily the white sheet kind, but the kind made of sounds, smells, and feelings that don't belong. Still, what happened last summer during my night shift at Jackson Memorial is something that none of my years prepared me for. I worked the night shift on the cardiac floor, a place where death isn't rare, but it's always quiet when it comes. Room 413 was my last check that night. The patient was a 67-year-old man named Raymond Cordero, a heart failure patient, sweet old guy. Liked to joke that the nurses were angels and that if he ever died, he'd stick around for a while just to make sure we're doing our jobs. He had that Cuban warmth about him, family photos on the table, rosary beads on the nightstand, an old transistor radio that played soft boleros when he couldn't sleep. He was stable that evening, sitting up and chatting with me around 9 p.m. He told me his son was flying in from New Jersey the next morning. He was excited about it. At 11:43 p.m., Raymond's monitor alarmed. Flatline. I ran in with another nurse, Daniela. We called a code, tried compressions, adrenaline, the works. But he was gone. The doctor called time of death at exactly 11:43 p.m. We did what we always do. We removed the lines, cleaned him up, and prepped the body for transport to the morgue. Daniela placed a white sheet over him, tagged his toe, and we quietly stepped out. I remember checking my watch. 12:02 a.m. That's when I noticed something odd. His call light blinked on the nurse's station panel, room 413. I laughed softly and said, "Guess Mr. Cordero's not ready to leave us yet." Daniela rolled her eyes. "Old wiring," she said. "It happens after power surges. Just reset it." I went to the room anyway. You learn not to ignore even the dumbest alerts. You never know if a family member came in or if someone got confused. The hallway was silent except for the low hum of fluorescent lights. The temperature felt colder near his door, that kind of sudden, almost metallic chill that doesn't make sense indoors. When I opened the door, the bed was empty. Not just empty, perfectly made. The sheet was tucked tight, corners folded like we do at shift start. His hospital gown was neatly folded on the floor beside the bed. I stood there frozen, thinking I had walked into the wrong room. But the nameplate read Cordero, Raymond. His rosary was still hanging from the IV pole. His radio set silent on the table. I called out quietly, "Mr. Cordero?" No answer. Just the faint hum of the air conditioner. I backed out and grabbed Daniela. "He's not in his bed." She frowned, thinking I meant a body transport came early. "The morgue techs haven't been up yet," she said. "We both went in this time." Still empty. The sheet, the gown. The tag that should have been on his toe was lying neatly on the pillow. "Someone screwing with us," Daniela muttered, but her voice was shaky. We checked the bathroom. Door closed. She knocked. "Environmental services?" No answer. She opened it. Empty. Lights off. That's when I noticed wet footprints leading from the bathroom to the bed. Bare feet. Small. Old. They ended right at the spot where the gown was folded. There was no water on the floor except those prints, and they weren't fading. I felt my stomach twist. I pressed the intercom to call security, but the panel crackled and hissed. Then a soft voice came through, not from the station, but from the radio on the bedside table. It played a few static bursts. Then Raymond's voice came through, calm, almost amused. "You said you'd check on me, didn't you, nurse?" Daniela screamed and ran out. I froze. I swear to you, I saw the bedsheet shift, like someone invisible sat down on it, and then the smell hit. That sharp, hospital cleaner smell mixed with something sweet and decayed, like flowers left in a closed room too long. The monitor above the bed, the one we disconnected, suddenly lit up. Heart rate 74 BPM, blood pressure 118/72. I remember whispering, "No, no, no," as I backed out of the room. The moment I crossed the threshold, the call light flicked off. Security searched the entire floor. The cameras in that corridor had glitched between 12:00 and 12:10 a.m. Black screen, static. The body transport never arrived that night because the paperwork was delayed. When they finally went to pick him up the next morning, they found his body downstairs in the morgue, already tagged, cold, and logged. So whoever, or whatever, was in that bed at 12:05 a.m. couldn't have been him. The hospital tried to explain it as a glitch. Wrong timestamp, data overlap, something about digital monitors buffering old vitals. But no one could explain the footprints. They faded by sunrise. For the next few weeks, no one wanted to be assigned to 413. Even housekeeping refused to clean it alone. They said the call light would blink between 11 and midnight, even when the room was empty. The final straw came 2 months later when a new patient, a diabetic man named Rivera, was admitted to 413. He was stable for a while. Then one night, around 11:30 p.m., he rang his call light and told me, "There's an old man sitting at the end of my bed. He says his name is Ray." When I checked, no one was there. But on the chair by the window, folded perfectly, was a hospital gown. They closed room 413 after that, renumbered it. The plaque now says 421, but every nurse who's been there long enough still calls it by its old number. And if you walk that hallway in the early hours, somewhere between 11:40 and midnight, you can see a faint red light flicker under the door, like someone still pressing the call button, waiting for a nurse to come check on him. I'm not usually the kind of person who believes in ghost stories or urban legends. I'm a nurse, a practical one at that. We deal with life, death, and the things in between every single day, so it takes a lot to really shake us. But the story I'm about to tell you, it changed the way I look at hospitals forever. It happened 2 years ago when I started my night shifts at a private hospital just outside Detroit. The building had been around since the 1940s. Long halls, flickering fluorescent lights, peeling paint in some corners. It was the kind of place that always smelled faintly of disinfectant and something older, something stale. During orientation, one of the senior nurses, Brenda, gave me the usual rundown: emergency protocols, med storage, shift schedules. But before she left, she lowered her voice and said something that didn't make sense at first. "One more thing, honey. Don't go down to the basement after midnight. If you need supplies, get them before then. And if you hear the motion alarms going off, just ignore them." I laughed, thinking she was just trying to mess with the new hire. But the way she looked at me, dead serious, eyes slightly wide, made it clear she wasn't joking. The basement was where we stored old medical equipment, records, and unused beds. Sometimes we'd have to go down there to grab things like IV poles or extra bedding. I'd been down a couple of times during the day, and yeah, it was creepy. Dimly lit with long rows of shelves filled with dusty boxes and metal carts. But nothing out of the ordinary, at least. That's what I thought. My third week on nights, I was working with Marcus, one of the younger RNs. We got along well. Lots of small talk, caffeine runs, venting about patients. Around 11:45 p.m., we realized we were out of sterile wraps for wound dressing. The supply closet upstairs was empty. "I'll go grab some from the basement," I said without thinking. Marcus paused mid-sip of his coffee. "You sure?" "It's almost midnight," I smiled. "You too, huh? You all really buy into that ghost story?" He didn't smile back. "It's not a ghost story, just don't take too long." I rolled my eyes and took the elevator down anyway. The basement smelled different at night. Damp, metallic, and cold. The lights buzzed overhead, some flickering like they were struggling to stay alive. My footsteps echoed way too loud on the concrete floor as I moved through the aisles, scanning the old labels on the storage racks. Then the motion lights behind me turned off. That wasn't supposed to happen. They were on a 10-minute timer, and I'd only been down there a few seconds. I froze, staring down the dim hallway of shelves as the darkness crept closer, swallowing the light one section at a time. Then, click. The lights ahead of me turned on by themselves, as if something or someone had walked ahead of me. My first thought was that Marcus was trying to mess with me, or maybe the motion sensors were just malfunctioning. They were old, after all. Still, I felt that slow, prickling unease crawl up my neck. I called out, "Hello? Marcus, if that's you, not funny." Silence. I grabbed what I needed and turned to head back to the elevator, my heart pounding harder than I wanted to admit. But just as I turned the corner, I caught sight of movement between two aisles. A shadow, tall and slow, crossing from one side to the other. It didn't make a sound. I stood frozen for maybe 20 seconds. Then I told myself it was probably just one of the maintenance guys. They sometimes worked overnight, fixing things. That had to be it. When I got back upstairs, Marcus was still at the nurse's station. He looked up as I came out of the elevator. "Everything good?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Just thought I saw someone down there." He didn't even blink. "You should tell security." I did. They checked the cameras. Here's where things got weird. The basement had 3 motion-activated cameras, one by the elevator, one near the old records section, and one at the far end where the oxygen tanks were kept. When security pulled up the footage, we could clearly see me walking down the aisle. Then a few seconds later, the light ahead of me turned on and but there was no one there. No shadow. No figure, nothing. I asked about the movement I saw between the shelves. The guard rewound the footage. Same moment. I was standing still, looking in that direction. But on the screen, I was completely alone. I told myself it was fatigue. Night shifts mess with your head, but the weird things didn't stop. Over the next few weeks, random motion alarms kept tripping down there, always between midnight and 3 a.m. Maintenance checked the wiring. Nothing was wrong. Security said they'd sometimes hear faint footsteps through the feed's audio, though no one ever appeared on camera. And then Brenda, the senior nurse, started avoiding the night shifts entirely. When I finally asked her why, she told me something I'll never forget. Back in '95, they had a patient go missing down there. Sick patient. He was supposed to be transferred, but he slipped out of his restraints during the move. Security searched for hours before they found him. "Found him?" I asked. She nodded. "In one of the old storage rooms. He'd wedged himself between 2 gurneys. They said it looked like he'd been trying to claw his way out." I asked if that room was still used. She said quietly, "It's still there." Right near the oxygen tanks. That was the same aisle where I saw the shadow. One night, Marcus got a page from ER asking for extra crash carts. It was 12:30 a.m. and I saw his face fall. He glanced at me. "You want to come with?" "I'm not going alone." We both took the elevator down. This time, we kept talking to each other, loud enough to fill the silence. The air felt heavy, humid, like being underwater. When we reached the bottom, the first thing I noticed was that the farthest light was already on. "Maybe security's down here," Marcus said, though he didn't sound sure. We moved slowly through the aisles, flashlights on. Everything looked normal. Boxes, chairs, old cribs stacked against the walls. Then, we heard it. A dragging sound, like metal scraping across the floor. Faint but steady, coming from the far corner of the basement. We stopped. "Hello?" Marcus called out. "This is hospital staff. You're not supposed to be down here." No answer. The scraping stopped. Then, after a few seconds, tap, 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 something small and sharp hitting the floor, like fingernails. Marcus's flashlight started flickering, and I swear to God, for just a moment, one brief moment, the beam landed on something crouched behind a row of metal carts. Pale, thin, wearing what looked like a hospital gown. Then it moved. Fast. The lights above us flickered out completely. Marcus grabbed my arm and we ran, full sprint to the elevator. When we got there, I slammed the button repeatedly, heart hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. The doors opened and we practically threw ourselves inside, just before they closed. I looked back. The last thing I saw was a hand, long fingers, grayish skin, sliding slowly back behind the shelf. Security swept the basement again that night. They found nothing. No signs of a break-in, no footprints, no movement on any camera. But here's the part that still makes my blood run cold. they did find drag marks on the concrete near the oxygen tanks. Long, curved grooves in the dust as if something heavy had been pulled or crawled across the floor. I quit 2 weeks later. Marcus transferred to day shifts. Brenda retired early. Sometimes I still dream about that place. The flickering lights, the cold air, the feeling that something was waiting down there in the dark, just out of sight. And every time I drive past the old hospital on my way home, I can't help but glance at the small basement window near the loading dock. Because once, and only once, I swear I saw someone standing there, watching. I've been a night shift nurse for nearly 15 years at a hospital in Philadelphia. If you've ever worked nights, you know how strange it can feel, how the hallways take on this different kind of silence. It's not peaceful. It's the kind of quiet that makes you aware of your own breathing, your own heartbeat, and once in a while that silence gets broken by something you can't explain. For me, it was Ward 9. The hospital is old, built in the early 1900s. Most of it has been renovated over time. But there's a wing on the east side that hasn't changed much since the 70s. The lighting's dim, the paint's yellowed, and the air always feels a few degrees colder. That's where Ward 9 is. Normally, the ward's used for patient overflow, when all the newer rooms are full. But for the last year or so, it's mostly been empty. I never really questioned why. One Friday night in late November, there was a storm. Wind howling against the windows, thunder rumbling low, rain pelting the glass like nails. Around midnight, the power went out. It wasn't unusual. Our hospital's backup generators kick in automatically. Within seconds, most of the lights flickered back on, except something odd happened right after that. Down the hallway, I saw a faint glow coming from Ward 9. At first, I thought maybe one of the emergency lights had failed to shut off or something. But when I went down there, I realized it was coming from one of the monitors in room 913. That room was supposed to be empty. Inside, there was a single bed perfectly made, and one monitor still running on backup power. The heart rate line was flat for a few seconds, and then it started to pulse. A steady rhythmic beep, 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 echoing through the quiet. I froze. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest as I stared at the monitor. The name on the patient ID tag said, Thomas A. Ridley. Admission date, March 4th, 1978. Status, deceased. At first, I thought maybe the system had glitched, some kind of data corruption pulling up an old record from the archives. I turned to leave and call maintenance, but right as I did, I heard something from behind me, a long drawn-out inhale. It came from the bed. The sheets shifted, just slightly, but enough to make me stop mid-step. The monitor spiked. The beeping grew faster. I backed away slowly, trying to convince myself it was my imagination, that maybe air was trapped under the sheets, or static had caused the monitor to flicker. I left the room and called up to the nurse's station. My colleague Jess answered. She laughed it off at first, said maybe I needed another coffee. But when she came down and saw the monitor for herself, the color drained from her face. We checked the hospital system together. There was no patient assigned to room 913. The name Thomas A. Ridley wasn't in any current files. We even tried searching the physical records in storage. Nothing. That's when Jess suggested we pull up the old archive logs. It took some digging, but around 2 a.m., we found it. An old scanned record from 1978. Thomas Ridley was a 47-year-old man admitted for head trauma after a car accident. He died on the operating table after going into cardiac arrest. Time of death, 11:59 p.m. The hairs on my arms stood up. I checked the time. It was 12:02 a.m. Jess and I looked at each other, both thinking the same thing but too scared to say it out loud. We went back to the room together. The monitor was still on, but now the heart rate was slowing. The beeps grew fainter farther apart until they flatlined again. Then, as if on cue, the lights flickered and the power came fully back. When everything stabilized, the monitor shut off completely. The room went silent. We both stood there just staring at that empty bed. And then faintly we heard it again, another inhale. This time it wasn't from the bed. It was from the corner of the room behind the curtain. Jess stepped forward before I could stop her. She pulled the curtain back, nothing there. Just a cracked tile floor and an old IV stand. But as soon as she did, the temperature dropped. We could see our breath fog in front of us. That's when we heard the intercom crackle to life. Code Blue, room 913. The announcement echoed through the entire floor. The problem? Nobody had triggered it. The system's manual. You have to press a specific button combination to call a Code Blue. Staff started running toward us. 3 other nurses, a resident, and security. They rushed in, expecting a real patient. When we explained what happened, they looked around, checked the machines, checked the power. Everything was normal again. The monitor was unplugged, and there was no record of any Code Blue being sent out from the system. One of the security guards, Mike, said quietly, "This isn't the first time someone's reported weird stuff in this room." Apparently, years ago, before the hospital upgraded to digital systems, nurses would occasionally find room 913 lights flickering on during power outages. Some even claimed to hear breathing or see shadows under the door when the room was supposed to be empty. We decided to leave the room sealed for the night. Maintenance came in the next morning, replaced the outlets, rewired the equipment, and ran diagnostics. Everything checked out fine. For the next few weeks, I avoided that hallway. But late one shift, I saw something again, on the security monitors. The feed for Ward 9 flickered for a few seconds, static crawling across the screen. And then just before it cut out, I saw a faint image, a man lying in the bed in room 913. No movement, no sound, but his eyes were open, staring straight at the camera. I called security, but by the time they checked, the room was empty. The bed was neatly made. That was 2 months ago. Since then, the hospital has officially closed off Ward 9. They say it's for renovations, but I know better. Last week, I walked past the locked double doors on my way to the supply room, and as I passed, I heard it again, through the door. Beep, 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 slow, steady, coming from deep inside the ward. I told myself it was just residual power or some old equipment left plugged in. But part of me knows the truth. Sometimes when the lights flicker during storms, the system still logs a heartbeat for a patient who shouldn't exist. And every time it does, the timestamp is the same, 1:59 p.m., just like it was in 1978. I'm not one to believe in supernatural crap. I've worked as a nurse for 8 years, mostly night shifts, and I've seen all sorts of weird things in hospitals. Patients talking to people who weren't there, motion sensors going off. In empty hallways, random alarms that couldn't be explained by maintenance. You learn to shrug it off, you have to. But there's something that happened during my last night at St. Mark's Hospital in Denver. Something that still keeps me from sleeping right. It's been months, and I can't stop replaying that shift over and over. It was a Thursday in late November, freezing outside, the kind of cold that makes your breath feel sharp. I was working my final shift before transferring to a new hospital across town. I'd been at St. Mark's for 5 years, mostly in the trauma unit, and everyone was treating the night like a send-off party. Balloons, cupcakes, the works. I was honestly looking forward to one last quiet night. The thing about St. Mark's is that it's old. The hospital was built in the 60s and has had so many renovations that the layout makes no sense. You could turn a corner and suddenly find yourself in a dead-end hallway with flickering fluorescent lights and a faint smell of bleach and old carpet. The security cameras were installed decades ago too, clunky black domes that feed into a grainy monitor room on the first floor. That night I was on the 5th floor, the surgical recovery wing. Only 3 patients were assigned to me. An elderly woman recovering from hip surgery, a middle-aged guy with a minor heart condition, and a young man who had been in a motorcycle accident but was stable. The rest of the floor was practically empty. Around 11:30 p.m., the halls went dead quiet, the kind of silence that feels too heavy for a hospital. The monitors hummed softly, and the only sound came from the cleaning staff buffing the floors 2 wings down. My coworker, Angie, was working the opposite wing. We'd been texting stupid memes all night, trying to stay awake. Around midnight, I noticed something weird. One of the patient call lights, room 512, flickered on for half a second, then went out. That's not supposed to happen. The call light either stays on until reset or doesn't turn on at all. I went to check anyway. The patient in 512, Mr. Dawson, was asleep. Heart monitor steady, vitals normal. I figured it was a glitch. When I walked back to the nurse's station, the same light flicked on again, 512. This time it stayed on. I sighed, half annoyed, and turned back, but before I could even reach the door, the light turned off again. I checked with maintenance over the radio, and they said everything looked fine from their end. They hadn't touched that panel in weeks. I brushed it off. Electrical quirks, old wiring, happens all the time. Then around 1 a.m., Angie radioed me. Her voice was calm, but a little shaky. "Hey, are you in the West Hall right now?" "No, why?" I asked. "Because I just saw you walk past the break room on camera. Thought you were heading downstairs." I frowned. "I've been sitting here at the station. Check the timestamp." She paused. "It's live, Lauren. It's the live feed." At that moment, my stomach turned cold. I walked over to the nearest security monitor on our floor, a small screen tucked behind the desk, showing a split feed from different hallways. Angie was right. On the west hallway feed, there I was. Same scrubs, same ponytail, same posture, walking down the corridor with a clipboard in hand. Only I wasn't there. I turned around in my chair, staring down the actual west hallway just 20 feet away. Empty, lights buzzing, not a soul in sight. When I looked back at the monitor, the figure that looked like me had stopped walking. She was standing perfectly still, right in front of one of the patient doors. Her head slowly turned toward the camera. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. Angie must have seen it too because she came over immediately. "What the hell is that?" she whispered. The screen flickered, went static for a second, then came back. Empty hallway. I grabbed my flashlight and decided to check anyway, because that's what you do. Hospitals train you not to panic even when everything in your gut tells you to. I walked the entire west wing. Every door was shut, every patient accounted for. The motion sensors didn't register anyone but me. I radioed security, but they said the main feed downstairs didn't show anything unusual. When I came back to the station, Angie looked pale. She'd been rewinding the footage on the monitor. "Look," she said, pointing at the screen. In the seconds before the static, the figure that looked like me, whatever it was, had stopped by the supply closet. The door to that closet was slightly open now. I hadn't touched it. We decided to check it together. Inside, the closet smelled like disinfectant and metal. Shelves of bandages, IV fluids, gloves, and a faint drip from a leaky pipe. Everything looked normal, except for the security mirror mounted on the back wall. It's one of those curved ones used to see around corners. For a moment, I caught a reflection of myself and Angie behind me. Then the fluorescent light overhead buzzed, dimmed, and I swear I saw another reflection in the mirror. It looked like me, but her head was tilted to the side, eyes slightly off as if she was smiling but didn't remember how. The lights flickered again and the reflection vanished. Angie wanted to call security, but I told her to hold off. It felt like we'd spooked the whole floor over a lighting issue. I told her we'd review the footage with the morning staff. By 3 a.m., the hospital was silent again. The camera feed seemed normal. I was exhausted but wide awake, nerves shot. Then came the worst part. Around 4:15, I went to print out my end-of-shift reports from the nurse's office. The printer room had a glass window facing the hallway. As I was waiting for the printer to spit out papers, I glanced out and froze. Someone was walking down the corridor. Slowly. Same build. Same walk. Same scrubs. For a split second, I thought it was Angie. But when I called her name, the figure didn't react. It just kept walking until it turned the corner. I ran out, turned the same corner, and found nothing. When I came back to the office, the printer had finished. On top of the stack of papers, someone had placed a single blank sheet, except it wasn't blank. There was a faint smeared fingerprint in the middle, a fingerprint that looked identical to mine. I checked the security feed one last time before leaving at 6:45 a.m. The morning staff had arrived, lights were brighter, and the building felt alive again. But on the main monitor in the feed from the west hallway, I saw something that made my skin crawl. There I was again, walking down the corridor, same tired gait, heading toward the supply closet. The timestamp on the footage said 7:10 a.m. MI was already outside by then. They reviewed the footage later that week. It said it was likely corrupted data, a playback artifact. The hospital admin told me not to worry about it. But here's what no one can explain. The west hallway camera was replaced the day after I left. The tech said the old unit was burnt out internally, like it had short-circuited from the inside. The weird thing, it wasn't even connected to a power overload. Sometimes, when I'm working nights at my new hospital, I'll catch a glimpse of myself reflected in a dark window. And for half a second, I swear she's just a fraction of a beat behind me, watching, waiting, like she's still trying to finish that final shift.